If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. In this episode, we have author and activist Sam J. Miller. Kat, how are things going with you?
Oh, things are up and down, but it's a nice fall, and I'm looking forward to spending time in Spain in November, so life is not too bad. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I mean, it's been kind of a rough summer. I'm not going to totally lie, but I'm trying to remain calm, and not panic,
That's it.
A few hard moments here and there, but so far we're making it through,
Huh.
But you mentioned Spain. Why don't you tell all of our listeners what you're doing in Spain? Because this is really kind of cool.
Oh, I am going to be running a writing workshop in a 10th century castle. Actually, by the time this comes out, I will have run it, I think, depending on, I don't know how much lag we have. But yeah, we've got Sarah Pinsker, Tobias Bickel, and Ann Leckie, and we're really looking forward to it.
Awesome. To answer your question, hopefully not too much lag. We've been having quite a bit of lag the last few episodes, but I'm trying to get this episode out in a few weeks if I can. So we'll see. I had to catch up,
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, if you're doing it in a couple of weeks, I may mention that at that point, if people wanted to come join us virtually, we are running a virtual component where you could study with those 3 fine instructors and myself. So you should check my website for details or ping me or whatever if you're interested in that.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't you just have something published not too long ago?
Oh, yeah, well, yes, the new space opera is out, Devil's Gun. And so far had some nice reviews, and I'm super happy with it. And I'm just finishing up the developmental edits for the 3rd book this week, in fact.
Awesome. I haven't got to it yet, but I plan to sometime after October.
There you go.
I'm trying to get through all of these, all this horror reading that I'm doing right now. So
That's cool.
Yeah. But once I get done with that, it's back to space operas and cool stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that horror stuff isn't cool, but it's not my normal reading.
Some of it is really interesting. I think there's a lot of really good stuff being done in horror lately.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Actually, I'll be interested to see what our guest has to say about that, because this episode is coming out in October, so maybe we should talk about some Halloween horror stuff.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. Let's do it.
All right. So our guest is going to be Sam J. Miller, and when we come back, we'll have him with us.
Yay!
And we're back. Today we have Sam J. Miller. His books have been called Must Reads and Best of the Year by USA Today, Entertainment Weekly, NPR, and the Oprah Magazine, among others, and have been translated into 9 languages. His work has won the Nebula, Locus, Shirley Jackson, and Subjective Chaos Kind of awards, as well as the hopefully soon-to-be renamed John W. Campbell Memorial Award. He's also the last in a long line of butchers. Sam lives in New York City and at samjmiller.com. So welcome aboard, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, let me say congrats on winning the Subjective Chaos Kind of Award.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. They maintain that it's only kind of an award, but I'm still super excited about it. And the trophy is a painted rock. So I can't wait for it to come in the mail so I can give an acceptance speech clutching it.
That's amazing. I honestly had not heard of that one yet. So that's still cool. I mean, I would take an award like that. Hint, people out there. In the intro, we were talking about being Halloween and horror and that sort of thing. Let's talk about that a little bit, if you're all right with that.
Absolutely.
you're very chaotic with your genre, right? You're all over the place. You're not one of those people who sits in one vein, and even every single book, honestly, could be categorized probably in multiple genres.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to say I'm very bad at genre. Like I keep trying to do something in a genre, and then it ends up in several, or just one, but not at all the one that I meant it to be.
I love that about your work. I love the being all over the place kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's just I get so sick of things being categorized one or the other. When things get mixed up, like it just lights up my brain.
Yeah, mine too. It's something I respond to as a reader a lot.
Absolutely. So one of those genres is horror, right? And I think for me, some of your best writing kind of leans into the horror genre. What is it about the horror genre that makes you excited?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like literarily, horror is my first love. It was the first thing that I really got excited about as a reader, mostly because it was forbidden, and I wasn't supposed to read it. But yeah, it's always been something that I respond to really powerfully. I love reading it. I love writing it. I feel like my horror is often in a place that's like invoking with and playing with the tropes and iconography of horror, but not necessarily like going for the jugular in the way that a lot of horror does. Although I do like to go for the jugular sometimes. But yeah, it's a very fun house to play in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Kat, you like the horror genre more than people give you credit for, I think. In fact, your Nebula winning story, I think, was technically horror, wasn't it?
It could be classified horror. Yeah, I would guess that about a good third of my pieces actually fall in horror of kind of one flavor or another. I think, horror is such an interesting thing to play around with because you're both invoking these sort of basic emotions. I mean, fear is something human beings know. And at the same time, you get to play around with the zeitgeist a little bit and be like, well, what are people scared of now? And, it is really interesting, in fact, that you can read kind of changes in culture in the horror movies that are coming out.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like horror is the most political genre because it's about what scares us. It's about the things that we don't want to talk about or the things that we're worried about. The other thing that I really like about horror as a writer, this is going to make me sound like a bad person, is that it's really easy. You don't need an explanation. It just is. Oftentimes I'll have an idea for some cool tech or some cool, what if the world was different in this way? And I'll think of it what would be the science fictional rationale for how the world? No. In horror, you don't need an explanation. It's just everyone woke up tomorrow and had no eyes. That's it. That's just how it is now. Yeah. Horror, in fact, in many ways is stronger without an explanation.
There's a book by Joe R. Lansdale called The Drive-In Chronicles, which I love for the fact that it is completely batshit crazy and just keeps on going. And every time you're like, well, I don't know, can Lansdale get any weirder? And it's just boom, hold my beer sort of action. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to remember for writers is that the book is your book. And if you want to be weird and wild, there's certainly space in horror to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things I want to mention here. I was at StokerCon this last summer, and the weird and wild aspect really came out to me there. I went to a few panels. I went to the Bizarro panel, and I went to a few other ones that were just opened my mind to some of that stuff a little bit. I didn't really know it existed. I think most of that stuff is published, in the smaller presses, though. So I totally think you're right there. And the political aspect is something I really want to go back to, Sam, in particular.
Sure.
When we started this podcast, Kat and I kind of decided that we intentionally wanted to go a little bit of a political route with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it was, science fiction to me is the most political because it talks about the future, right? And politics are about how we're going to turn the present into the future. But going to StokerCon, I kind of started to see the politics within horror. I don't know if it's just because of the newer writers that are coming up or because of the panels I went to or what it is, but I really am starting to feel the politics in horror more. So can you talk about that a little bit more, Sam? How are you seeing the politics and the horror? What makes horror the most political genre?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like for a lot of its history, horror's politics have been invisible because they align frequently very squarely with the dominant political ideology. And Stephen King has this great analysis of this, of like, he doesn't understand why so many far right figures want to censor horror, because horror often is really conservative, and it does boil down to a man with a hockey mask punishing women for their sexuality,
right?
Or any number of iterations of like, you know, here are people being like young people in a vulnerable situation being butchered by like a big, strong adult man.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is why often we don't think of horror as political, because a lot of the main sort of alignment of who is the monster, who are the victims, is frequently not, you know, it's it's pretty fascist. But that's not really in its nature. I think that we're definitely now seeing so much exciting, amazing horror that's being written by marginalized folks that's really upending a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like 2 of the best horror novels I've read in the past year are both by trans authors, Queen of Teeth and Hell Followed With Us. And just like the level of deranged, batshit, magnificent, like body horror weirdness of them is so exciting and exhilarating and horrifying and brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's all about like who's doing the killing and why, who is the monster and why, who are the victims and why.
Interesting.
I think one of my favorite horror writers is Stephen Graham Jones,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like everything he writes is just freaking brilliant.
Yep.
I've read 2 stories by him. The first one I read was recommended to me by a friend of mine, Scott Hallam, and I am still scarred by that story.
Which story was it?
Oh God. Okay, so this is going to be spoilers, everybody. So if you don't like spoilers, jump ahead.
Well, is it Father, Son, Holy Rabbit? Because if so, I forbid you to.
Yes, because like the father and son are like lost out in the wilderness.
Don't spoil it. It is the most magnificent.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Yes.
It's so fucked up.
It is do you know this story, Sam?
I don't. I love Stephen Graham Jones.
It's in his first collection, I believe. And if you can't find it, I will Xerox mine for you, because it is just really just a phenomenal story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Sam.
Thank you.
This story has scarred me for real.
Oh, I can't.
Well,
I can't wait.
I sometimes wish that there were ways to kind of go back and erase the memory of having read something so you can read it kind of with that fresh pleasure once again. Although I do reread a lot, but wouldn't that be nice? I would do that with his stuff a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, I really savor the experience of rereading and like being liberated from like what the fuck is going to happen next. I experience this a lot when I'm watching a movie for the second time. Like, I can appreciate the artistry of it so much more.
Oh yeah.
Like I can focus on that instead of like the narrative. Like I don't know if y'all saw Talk to Me.
Not yet.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's one of the best horror movies I've seen in a while.
Oh, awesome.
And it's now on streaming, I think. And it's great and it's fresh and it's exciting. And then the ending is really like when we walked out of that, my husband and our friend, we all had a dramatically different understanding of what happened
that's awesome.
in the ending. And then like rewatching it with my mom, I was able to see like, oh, like you can just focus on like the details of what is actually happening instead of like being terrified for the fate of the characters.
Oh, okay. So I don't watch a lot of horror stuff. Like I've watched the Mike Flanagan stuff on Netflix, pretty much all of it. And I watched, who's the name of the Jordan Peele? His newest one was Gone or something, or Nope.
Nope.
Yeah. Nope. That's it.
I don't watch much. That's like the last few things I've really watched that was horror centric. What horror movies do you both like?
Cat.
I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. I'm going to confess. I do like really bloody, horrible horror movies. Like I've watched all of the Saw movies.
Respect and fear.
Yes. I just can't. I can't do it with those kind of movies. I can't do it. I just can't. No. Mm-mm.
My favorite horror movie of all time is Candyman, the original.
Oh yeah. I've seen that.
Which is like, you know, speaking of like political horror, it's like this brilliant look at like the housing crisis and the history of racism and of really gnarly monster and brilliant acting and a great script and story. Yeah. And yeah, I've seen, I mean, I love horror movies. I'll see pretty much anything. Although I did enjoy the first couple Saw movies. I thought they were really clever, but by and large, I find that type of movie very difficult. The quote unquote torture porn.
Yeah. Right.
Although I did see the trailer for the new Saw movie, and it actually is an excellent trailer. Although I don't think it's going to be sufficient to get me in the theater.
I'm 100% with you, Sam. I cannot do those types of movies either. You're mentioning horror in the housing crisis, and it made me think of your novel, The Blade Between. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this has really been like this is my when I'm writing horror, it's usually because I'm like, I want to talk about like my take on genre, big picture, is that like, this is how I see the world. It like the world, like fantasy, right? The world is magic. The world is full of magic. And I want to, like, if I'm writing a fantasy story, it's because I want to capture some aspect of it. And if I'm writing a horror story, it's because I'm like, the world is full of horror, and that's reality. And that's what I want to capture. You know, I spent 15 years working with homeless people in New York City who are living lives that are, you know, full of hope and power and resilience and resistance, but are also like unspeakably difficult and subject to like horrific daily indignities and cruelties and things that like most international treaties acknowledge as torture. So that's way scarier than a werewolf. So often like The Blade Between is just one of like me trying to like take a horror story that I think exists around us all the time that many people don't grasp or understand or see the horror of, and trying to help like make people see the horror of it, you know. And gentrification is such an issue that like people have a really hard time evaluating rationally, like thinking about rationally, because so many people are like caught up in it, either like implicated by it, responsible for it, victimized by it. And so it's really difficult to have a conversation around without people getting like defensive or angry or both. So yeah, like ghost stories are a really powerful way to talk about like who used to live where you live, like who was displaced for you to live there, like what are they, like where are they now, what are they dealing with, you know, how do we coexist in limited housing stock?
So kind of going along those lines, what do you think of the recent rise in cozy horror, which is a term I only recently hit and was like, oh.
I guess I don't know enough about it to answer. I must confess that, like, you know, this is me speaking from the place of ignorance, but often when I see cozy in the name of something or in the description of something, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I'm really glad, like, people really love that. I'm really glad that exists. That is not for me. So there, I mean, there's definitely things that I enjoy that that are cozy. I'm sure a chill, comforting, pleasant read is very valuable. And I enjoy those things too sometimes, but by and large is not something I seek out. So I don't know if there's particular books you're thinking of or titles you could point to.
Well, I think people have mentioned John Wiswell's, I can't remember the house story.
Yeah, I love everything John does that I've read. And so I would exempt, I guess that I don't think of that as that, but it could be. And again, maybe this is just not the cozy subgenres are just not something I fully understand or have thought enough about. And yeah, like there's often ways there's many approaches and there's many ways to like tackle tough topics. And sometimes that's about like rubbing people's nose in the horror of it. And sometimes it's about like another approach. So I'm into it.
Interesting. It's funny. You're kind of very in the middle. You don't like the cozy and you don't like the torture porn, but everything in the middle is good, right?
I guess. I mean, but you know, I'm like the editor of the magazine who says I don't want any zombie stories, but then they get a really good zombie story, and they're like, "Well, fuck." So yeah, I might, you know, whatever my biases are, they always explode on contact with the reality of a really great piece of art. Yeah. So you know, like I used to say that I hate Westerns, and then I saw like some fucking brilliant Westerns. And I'm like, oh, I don't hate, there's no genre that I hate. There's just genres that I might not like respond to, or there's many like conventional narratives that I think of as like the main form of the genre, but that there's much more going on than I'm aware of. So I should invest more energy into it.
Sure. Well, I mean, in your defense a little bit, I do the same thing sometimes. You like read the back of a book or something, and like, oh, this is just not for me. And then like sometime down the line, you end up reading it for whatever reason. You're like, oh my God, actually, that book was amazing.
Exactly.
And you just don't know until you know sometimes,
Yep.
Going back to your horror a little bit, The Blade Between, I just want to give everyone a real quick summary of what that book was about.
Yeah.
So basically, the main character is moving back to Hudson, New York, where he grew up. But then he had moved to New York City and kind of become a somewhat famous photographer. And then he moves back and meets some of his old friends and lovers, and things kind of start going bad. There's like whale ghosts involved, and it deals a lot with the housing crisis and a mayoral candidate that people don't like. Well, he doesn't like, and some of his friends don't like, because they're going to gentrify everything. And I mean, I think that's enough, right? And then whale ghosts get involved because of the history of Hudson as a whaling town, and then things go into horror land.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds like that book.
That reading that book, and just so everybody knows, I'm not like best friends with Sam or anything, and it's not like we hang out all the time or anything. But I've interviewed you like 2 or 3 other times, so like I feel like I know you well enough, right? I felt like that was a very biographical book for you.
Oh yeah, 100%. The main character's father owns a butcher shop at 310 Warren Street in Hudson, New York, and so did mine. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean there's a lot of me in a lot of my stuff, but this character maps really, really cleanly to me in a lot of ways. He's just much more of a hot mess. Like I'm more of like a cold mess. Like I'm too lazy to be like a really hot mess. Mm-hmm. So yeah, most of the bad decisions he makes, it's not that I wouldn't make that decision. I'm just really tired. So yeah. I mean, it's like that, the town I grew up in, where I'm incidentally enough sitting right now, is gentrifying really rapidly. And it did have a history of as a whaling center, in spite of the fact that it's 115 miles up the Hudson River away from the ocean. And, I was really fascinated by this place where whales are really like important to our history, and we talk about them a lot, and we have signs up. Like every stop sign in the city has a little whale on it. It's who we are. It's sort of like we point to our past really proudly. Hudson, has a really diverse history in a way that a lot of other areas of upstate New York don't have. And when urban renewal came to Hudson, like it's one of the few cities where people like really organized to stop it. And so like a lot of the destruction of old houses and buildings that happen in other places didn't happen here. So yeah, it has a proud history that it's proud of. And also it can't wait to fucking sell every fucking square inch to rich people to profit off of. And it doesn't care who gets, like the people who've been here for generations, who kept it, the special place that it is, now can't afford to live here. So yeah, this is like, I was living in New York and working on gentrification and housing and homelessness. And then like slowly coming to realize that like, it's happening in my hometown, and I have a really complicated relationship to it because I grew up there, I'm from there, but also like, I'm a gay artist from the city who goes up there and has more disposable income than many folks do. And, I'm patronizing the fancy businesses maybe more than I'd like, kind of thing. So like thinking about like just how complicated gentrification is. Actually, I hate the word complicated to describe gentrification. I think people use it often as like an out to not think about their responsibility in it. So not that it's complicated, but that we're all in it, and we need to think like the solution is actually really complex, because like the resolution that we might like want of like, oh, either you leave or I leave, is like possible, but like the more likely scenario, the scenario that history shows us, is like, no, we're going to be here. We're going to be here side by side, and we have to like figure out a way forward where we can like deal with the trauma that's happened and move forward. So, this is like, what if there was a truth and reconciliation hearing committee for gentrification, and how might we get there? Plus monsters.
Right. Is there a reason why you made this one so biographical? Your horror novel or thriller, I've seen it described both ways. Is it because gentrification and the housing crisis has been so much of your life that it felt like you had to put more of yourself in there? Or it just came out that way? Or
it's a good question. I mean, I think that most, like probably everything I've ever written, like comes from something that bothers me. Like some of my short stories is like, sometimes it's as simple as like, I don't understand how a parent could reject their child for being queer. And I want to write a story about a parent who does that so that I can understand how someone could make that decision. And so this, as I was sort of thinking through this story, there was no, the thing that was bothering me couldn't be talked about in like isolation from who I was, but also like it's important to own our complicated relationships with things like gentrification and responsibility. So yeah, I think to talk about something honestly, I probably felt like I needed to be like really honest and say like here's a character who resembles me in many ways. I'm not going to like, yes, it's a fictional character who I'm hiding behind, but it resembles me in a lot of ways. So I'm hiding less than maybe I sometimes do.
Interesting.
Do you find yourself pulling from pieces of your past in any of your past works like that? Or is it just that this book felt more personal?
Yeah, I mean, it's always in there. Like, actually, of my 4 published novels, 3 of them take place in Hudson. Okay. So, yeah. You know, I'm always digging into the same, like, work that is either about young adults or children are rooted in, like, things that happen to me. They're often just, like, you know, less.
Right.
You know, the New York Times doesn't write about them every 3 months the way they do about, like, how Hudson, like, every 8 months, the New York Times writes an article about how Hudson is the new up-and-coming Brooklyn, whatever. So yeah, this was, I guess, just like the big picture was much bigger and easier to trace than like the story about this thing that happened to me when I was 8 that nobody knows about but my sister.
Interesting. Now that we're on the blade between, I noticed something in this book that I really admire. You really show a lot of awareness around racism in your work, especially in this book, I feel like. So I'm going to read a real quick quote if you all don't mind. Sam, hopefully that's not embarrassing for you.
I'll tell you after you read it.
And that's why this book is horrible. Don't buy his books. Let me find it. Here it is. Rebecca has always been a little bit afraid of Atala. Hopefully I'm saying that name right. Mm-hmm. She can't say why. Always assumed it was a tiny sliver of racism on her part, some vestigial fear of a strong Black woman. And so she's always gone out of her way to ignore that fear, which is what she does now. As she says, "Yes, Atala, I'll do it. No, Atala, I trust you. No need to thank me. Talk to you soon." So, like, I think what I'm trying to show with this example is just like your awareness of it and your ability to reflect that in the characters. And throughout this book, you know, you have like all the characters have varying levels of awareness of racism. Do you have any tips for our writer listeners on how to do that, you know, or like how to write realistic characters while not being overtly racist as the writer?
Yeah, I mean, I no, I don't have any tips, or I don't know that I'm doing a particularly great job of it. Just that it's something that I really that's important to me to think about and to write about. I read a lot of James Baldwin at a formative age, and you know the point that James Baldwin makes over and over again that's really compelling is that like no, white people are harmed by racism. Like white people are like damaged and like broken by white supremacy, and like, you know, any like white person who thinks that they can, you know, write about America without writing about race, or that they can like write about their own identity without grappling with what racism is and what the legacy of white supremacy is in America, I think are like, you know, naive at best, right? Like, I'm not going to name any names, Jonathan Franzen, but you know, like there are writers who have sort of like gone on record as saying like, oh, that's not something that like I feel is relevant to my work, or that like I have anything to say about. And that's really like a, you know, I don't know if that is honest, or that they think they're being honest, but I think it's a mistake. And so, you know, like just like it'd be folly for a cis het male writer to think that they don't have to write about gender. Mm-hmm. We are all caught up in like complicated webs of oppression and privilege. And if we're not successful in confronting that, we are unsuccessful as storytellers often, because, you know, these are realities that we have an opportunity to illuminate or talk about or address. So yeah, I mean, I guess the only advice I would give, besides like take the writing the other workshops, which are amazing, is to just read a lot and to read really, read as much from lots of people who are really different than you, because the better you can understand the world around you, the better your horror, your science fiction, your fantasy is going to be.
I feel like with Franzen and his ilk that they are so used to being the default position that they think there is this default position that is absolutely neutral, that everything else kind of spins around.
Exactly.
Interesting. I appreciate that explanation. I mean, for me, racism is I'm white, just for the record, in case nobody already knew that. But, I am a staunch anti-racist, and I always have been. And for me, that's a very, very important issue. And it should be to all of our listeners too. I'm looking at you all.
Agreed.
And also just like speaking from like an activist perspective, and like, I am pretty like unapologetic when it comes to like, lots of writers are like, oh no, don't write about politics. Politics is bad for fiction. But I disagree. It might be bad for their fiction. It might be bad for my fiction. I don't know. But it is like, like, for example, like I was just on a panel about climate change, and like, talking about climate change without also talking about like racism or like colonization or the history of imperialism,
right,
is makes our climate fiction impoverished and less effective. So just like we have an obligation to like educate ourselves as much as possible about like intersectionality and all of the sort of like many, many, many vectors of historical oppression and violence and marginalization.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I had and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I can't remember if I had. When I went to college, my roommate was Black. Now, I grew up in a very small town in the middle of nowhere. There were some Black people that lived there, but we were very segregated. The Youngstown area, there's like the city part, which is very Black, and then there is the suburbs. I really hesitate to call them suburbs. They're not suburbs like you would think of in a city, but they're kind of like the suburbs, are very white, but they're mostly like small little towns. You know what I mean? Meeting him, man, just broke open my brain so much, and I just learned so much from him. And I guess I'm just coming around to say that I can see the things that I've learned in your work, and I think that's awesome and to be commended, I guess. So thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's literally my pleasure. It's these are all, the world is really messed up, and the more we can like tackle the ways in which it's messed up, the better. The better I feel about my storytelling, at least.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's change gears a little bit. Do you all want to talk about Kid Wolf and Kraken Boy?
Sure. Yeah, let's chat.
I'd love to know what was the original inspirational moment for it.
Ooh.
So there's like a kernel of this novella was published in 2022, and there's like a page, there's like 3 paragraphs that existed unchanged from a short story I wrote at Clarion in 2012 that sort of like got grafted onto like 3 different short stories over the course of my like trying to figure it out, having to do with tattoos and magic. And so that was sort of where the story was born. And so, yeah, tattoos are awesome, and I think they're magic. That's sort of like where the magic system and the sort of narrative underpinning is. Mm-hmm. The short version of where the basic characters of Kid Wolf and Kraken Boy and their relationship and their journey came from is that I was actually getting dinged on social media a bit because The Blade Between, like many of my pieces, doesn't have the most, I don't want to spoil, I'll just say that many of my pieces do not have happy endings for the queer couples.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have happy endings for anyone. But there's a particular, as a queer person, I definitely understand that there's a acute yearning for happy endings that queer people experience that other folks don't, because they might be used to seeing happy endings for their folks. Whereas, historically, when queer storytelling happens, it's often like the Brokeback Mountain of like, here's a beautiful love affair and it's horrific, tragic end. So yeah, thinking through like, okay, I'm going to take the note. I'm going to think about the fact that like while I wasn't necessarily gleefully, intentionally devising unhappy outcomes for my queer characters, I am capable of imagining happy end. Like I am capable of imagining another kind of ending. And I do have like, the personal experience of like having a beautiful, happy, long-term love story with a person of the same gender as me that's sort of transformed my life and my world. And so like, well, maybe I can write that story. Like what would that be like? And how might we sort of not just like give a happy ending, but talk about ways that like a gay love story can change the world.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely.
Thank you.
That is awesome. I want to go back to something you said towards the beginning, because I also love tattoos and I have many, many tattoos.
Awesome.
You also said tattoos are magic, which I think is awesome. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, so there's like a personal like level like that. I do feel like it changes you somehow. Like a tattoo, like for one thing, it's like a piece of art that a talented artist, ideally, is affixing to your body forever. And so you now carry a piece of majestic art with you, and that makes you a different person. Also, like I just think like historically looking at the ways in which tattoos evolved and like the many, many global cultures where tattoos evolved independently, they are often to denote a transition, right? It's a like an adulthood or a victory in something, or a change in your life status. That they're markers of passage, and they're markers of transformation. And so while I do think that there's like there's probably contexts in which tattoos are endowed with magical or spiritual force. It's also just like there's nothing wrong with just getting a tattoo to get one. For me personally, I want like my tattoos are about like, something that are some sort of achievement that has changed me. So, it's art is magic. And also it's like a radical declaration of ownership of your body. It's like, I can do whatever I want. Like, this is it. This is what I got. I don't have anything else than this. This is what I can control and what I can do with as I please.
Nice.
What do y'all have?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask if y'all had, what y'all's tattoo like philosophy or markers or thoughts are.
I have 3, one of which was I'm in New Orleans and I'm drunk and going to get a tattoo. But then the other 2 are kind of, one is a piece of art from a friend of mine, and then the other is a bumblebee, because it's supposed to be the Celtic sign of inspiration and poetry.
Amazing.
Jeez, for me, so I have a lot. I can't name them all. I will tell you, the half of my chest is done. I have a half sleeve. My entire side's done. I've got part of my back done. And I was just planning out the rest of my sleeve this morning, actually.
Amazing.
Unbeknownst to me that we'd be talking about this today. To me, it's more of like, I don't know. It's kind of like partly my history. And partly like, I don't know, like I feel like some of them are my wards against evil almost. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So like I've a couple like band logos and stuff, bands that were either really important to me for some reason or another, or bands that I feel like hold a philosophy that I aspire to, maybe. I also have like tattoos for my own bands, on me, as well as, oh boy, a bunch of other stuff. I have a portrait of, I shouldn't say a portrait, but a scene of Youngstown, Ohio, where I'm from, in the midst of the steel, when the steel industry was there.
Amazing.
And a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know if I have a solid philosophy on it, other than I just like them a lot. And I support art. I just love art,
Yeah, those are sufficient philosophies, I think.
Yeah.
Very rambling philosophy. Sorry about that. So to tie this together a little bit with Lay Between, I think for both books, it seems like you did a decent amount of historical research. Can you talk about the research you did for the books, how you went about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, my preface is always like, I am really bad at research because I really like it and I get really excited and I learn and I learn a lot of things. And suddenly it's not a short story. It's a Wikipedia entry about like, the history of the labor movement or whatever other thing I'm writing about. So I did a lot of research in both cases. And, some of it is like, with Kid Wolf and Kraken Boy, researching sort of cultural traditions with tattooing that are not my own and not wanting to like, get it wrong or ascribe magical, like, there's sort of like often an Orientalist lens through which people view other cultures where it's like attributing, like purporting to or believing oneself capable of like describing accurately a phenomena that you actually just don't understand at all. So a lot of that was sort of like interesting and sort of helped me formulate some of the world of the story and how I thought about it, but didn't necessarily go on the page. I did have like a really big like research rejection revelation with The Blade Between, because there's a narrative that I was sort of raised with in Hudson of like how whaling happened in the town and like, okay, well, if it's so far from the river, why, how? And the sort of story that I had been told was that like, whaling vessels would sort of like drag the whale carcasses up to Hudson to be rendered, to be butchered, to be whatever. And that's not actually true. I should have known that from reading Moby Dick, but the research that I was doing in the Hudson Library has a great research room with access to a lot of great primary and secondary sources. And yeah, just like you see in Moby Dick, you kill a whale in the Sea of Japan, you butcher the whale in the Sea of Japan, and you sort of like render it right then and there, and you cut off all the fat and you boil it down and you put it in a barrel and you purify it and whatever, and then you take that back to your home port where it gets sold. So that conflicted with the narrative, that the sort of like image that I had been raised with of like, the whales being like butchered in the streets, right, and the sort of like bloody, like a winter scene of like snow covered in blood as far as the eye can see. So, in true Man Who Shot Liberty Valance fashion, when I don't know, I can't remember the quote, but it's something like when the truth confronts the legend, print the legend. I printed the legend and went with the historically inaccurate version I had been raised with because it was bloodier and more narratively expedient for the sort of like central supernatural concept I had of like the ghosts of the murdered whales haunt the city and sort of like make up its identity.
Huh. That's cool. That's cool. I really liked the setting of 1920s New York in Kid Wolf. That was very cool. And I love that you went with a tattoo artist. As we've already talked about, I am partial to tattoos. I actually worked in a couple tattoo parlors over my years.
Oh, amazing.
Not as an artist, but as the guy who did all the other stuff.
Amazing.
Because I am not talented like that. What were some cool facts that you learned about 1920s New York that surprised you?
I mean, some of it wasn't like I didn't learn it, but I had a greater understanding of it. That was exciting. Like, so I'm Jewish and I am a boxing fan, and my dad was. They were like it's the only sport that he liked or that I like, and so this understanding that the 20s was a period when like Jews were, many of the biggest boxing champions were Jewish, and that this sort of like narrative that many people, including Jewish people, are sort of raised with of Jews as sort of like studious, literary, nebbish Woody Allen, like literary like types is not the diverse, does not accurately represent the diversity of Jewish experience, and that like that there was like that people who were like really that could like fucking clobber you, is a fascinating sort of like thing that is not, I still don't think is like a big part of our understanding of like what Judaism is. So that was really interesting. The other interesting thing is that like looking at the history of organized crime, it is a place where, because it was like by nature extra legal and existed outside the boundaries of it wasn't subject to, for example, racial quotas because it was not governed by, the institutions that sort of like govern higher education, for example, or that govern many industries that would keep people out. So it was a space where like, folks who had been disempowered within the American society of the moment could have agency and power. And that's not to say that they weren't awful in many cases and that they didn't like engage in widespread violence and not to say that they were great, but that, it's a space for exploring narratives that are outside of our sort of conventional white cis het dominance lens through which we are often looking at periods like that.
Cool. Well, we should probably start wrapping this up, Kat.
Yeah. All right.
Well, we got a couple finish-up questions that we ask everybody. So what is giving you hope right now? Maybe I should have warned you about that one. Sometimes I warn people about that question ahead of time.
I mean, so nature always gives me hope. I'm able to spend a pretty fair amount of time in it and, connecting with the resilience of nature. And like when I realize just how like existentially fucked humanity is, the power of nature to, come back from our shenanigans is impressive. So that's always hopeful and good. I'm reading, like good fiction is giving me hope. So that's there's a lot of great stuff to get hopeful about.
Awesome. What do you have coming out soon? Any good projects going on?
I do. I actually, there's actually going to be an announcement about it in about a week. All I can say right now is that I've been working on a video game for 2.5 years. I've been teaching myself programming to make an old school RPG, like 2D Game Boy style.
Fun.
That's been really, really hard and really fun. And I had like a story that I did not know what to do with, and it didn't want to be a novel and it didn't want to be a short story. And I realized that it's because it can take so many paths, and I wanted to like really explore the storytelling possibilities of video games. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome.
So cool.
Do you happen to know Paul Jessup by any chance?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. We need to introduce you to Paul Jessup because he
not only game.
Do you know Paul? Kat?
I know Paul, and he did this. If I'm thinking the same one, he wrote this hysterical game about being a writer.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I've heard of it. Awesome.
When he's not writing novels, he writes video games. So,
awesome.
And then he programs them and everything and puts them out.
Nice.
Also, you don't by any chance happen to be writing a book with Ray Naylor, do you? Because when we had him on, we told him he needed to start writing a book with you about sea creatures, a science fiction book about sea creatures. And that was a few months ago. So I'm expecting that to start happening.
I mean, as much as I'm sure Ray does whatever you tell him to do, the only conversations I've had with Ray have been mutual squeeing in each other's directions. And also Ray's book that just got, the cover was just released. I believe it's called The Tusks of Extinction.
It looks awesome.
It looks amazing. And I have a mammoth tattoo on my body. So he needs to, maybe there is a collaboration in our future.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Ray, I hope you're listening to this. All right. Well, that's awesome. Where can everyone find you aside from your website, right? samjmiller.com.
Yep.
Where else can we find you?
I'm on, well, who knows where Twitter/X will be by the time this airs, but I am still Sentence Bender at Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Mastodon. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as sam.j.miller. I'm all over the place. Google me. I'm there, wherever it is.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Love it. This has been a great conversation.
Yay. Woohoo. And that was our guest, Sam J. Miller. Before we continue on, I just want to remind everybody, please share us with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever it's called now, Blue Sky, Mastodon, whatever crazy social media that you're on now. Please share us. Or if you want, you could rate and review us. That would also be most excellent. if you really like what we're doing, we also have a Patreon account. That's patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. You can find us there. And I'm going to be very honest with you. My family has been going through some tough times right now, and we could really use some help over at Patreon. So I would really appreciate it if you could just $1 in over at Patreon, $1 a month, $2 a month. That would be huge for us. I'd really appreciate that. If you don't want to do a Patreon thing that's every month, we also have a coffee account that's KOFI, and you can just like put us in the search bar and search us. Just did it the other day, so you should be able to find us pretty easily that way. And I think I'm going to leave it at that this week. Kat, thoughts and opinions?
Sam is always a delight to talk to. He's just articulate and smart, and I think he is one of the people who I really respect because their day job reflects their values.
Yes. Very much yes on that. Very much yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I admire him for being able to do that. There are many times when I look at my job and I'm just like, I can't believe I do this.
Oh, yeah. Well, my ex used to work for all, like you name the evil tech company.
Right.
He worked for.
Yes.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and I'm kind of stuck there too because those are only places that can afford the people that do what I do. So that's where I have to work. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which it sucks, but the way I figure it is, I just take their money and then I give it to good things.
There you go.
Yeah, so I love that aspect about him too, and I was glad to get his perspective on some Halloween stuff too.
Oh, for sure.
I just found it so interesting that he thought horror was the most political genre. This whole idea is kind of mind-blowing to me right now.
Think about like every movie that Jordan Peele has done.
Right.
Just dynamite horror and just awfully good social commentary too, right?
Yeah, I think my misperception basically comes from the same stuff that Sam was saying. Like I grew up on Stephen King. Stephen King was one of the first genre authors I read, right? So, him, like Dean Koontz, I'm trying to think of who else, you know what I mean? Like, but you know what I'm saying, like those, like.
Do you, I'm sorry, this is a sidetrack, but because I have to recommend this to you if you haven't follow it, but Bitter Corella does the Tales of the Midnight Society.
Yes.
And Dean Koontz is one of the characters, as is Stephen King, and it just freaking brilliant.
Yes, it totally is brilliant. And listeners, if you have not checked this out, you definitely should. And they have a podcast now. Did you know that?
Yeah, and a Patreon too. So you could get 2-for-1 action if you went and first supported us and then Bitter Corella.
Yes.
It doesn't matter which order you do it in, but both would be good.
Yes, it is amazing. Every day I see one of their posts on social media, immediately that's the first thing I do is go and read it. I love it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
My only beef is when they had Maurice Brodus in one of their things, and he didn't say.
Oh, did they?
He didn't say a joke.
Oh, God. See, that's my ambition. Is to at some point I need to start writing more horror because I would love to be in there. I think it's just I love it when he does Elon Musk versus Stephen King, and I don't know what it is that makes it so freaking funny, but I laugh out loud.
Oh, every time. So hilarious. So everyone please go listen to that or read it.
Yeah.
I think they also have books, printed versions, so there's that too.
Yes, I actually supported the Kickstarter for the books. So yes, they're very funny. You should get them.
Awesome. Because my reading in my early days was very focused on those horror writers. And also being not educated about those things when I was younger, going to small town high school where everybody was white pretty much. You know what I mean? Like horror has always struck me as very non-political. And the Jordan Peele thing is a good point because while I obviously saw him as political, for some reason, just my brain did not connect him with the rest of horror. It was kind of like, yeah, he's doing his thing. You know what I mean? And it's political and that's cool. But, Another
good example, fairly recent, is Matt Ruff's Lovecraft Country.
Yes.
Or I don't remember if it's country or county, but it got made into a series that had, to me, one of the scariest moments ever of television. It
wow, really? That's interesting.
Oh, God, yeah.
I'm glad that my perception on that has changed. I'm glad I went to StokerCon and got my perception changed because I do want to bring more horror writers on. So,
Yay!
yeah.
Oh, I can think of a bunch. I'll ping you. We'll get them on. I wanted to mention 2 books that I recently finished. One is The Conductors by Nicole Glover, which is what if the Underground Railway ran on magic,
Oh, I think I heard of that.
and is a kind of really, it's a cool, fun book. And the other is called The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. And it is told, it's basically, it's a world that's kind of like the Buffy verse, but it's told from the point of view of one of the kids who's just not involved with any of the supernatural stuff. And so like all of that is kind of going on in the background, just like barely can tell what's going on. And he has anxiety. And so the book is wonderful. It's just really, really wonderful book.
Oh, that sounds so funny. And I think everyone can relate to anxiety at this point. Lord knows my anxiety has gone up quite a bit.
God knows, yes. Well, it's just anxious days. So, yeah.
Oh, truly, truly. Well, what am I reading right now? Let's see. So I am reading The Scar by China Maleville.
Oh, good stuff.
Yes. The first book I read by him was The City in the City, which blew my freaking mind completely.
We should try to get him on.
Oh, man. If we got him on, Kat, my brain would explode.
Well, it's worth a shot. I mean, you know my philosophy. It's worth a shot. Why not?
You're right. It is worth a shot. We should totally try to do that. He's one of those people, like, I never even, like, considered bringing him on.
Well, he actually came to Microsoft at one point, because Microsoft used to bring in writers to talk to people for these afternoon talks, and I got to have lunch with him, and I asked him what universe would he write fan fiction in if he were going to write fan fiction. And he said Buffy. And that was before all the kind of Joss Whedon turns out to be a terrible turd stuff came out. But I always appreciated that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So The Scar, so everybody knows, is the sequel to Paradiso Station. And it's like loosely related. It kind of gives the impetus for the main character for the second book to happen, basically.
Right.
But it takes place out on the sea, and there's more weird human type, I don't even know if you call them races or what they are, but strange creature like species. Yeah, there you go. Species. And it's got that creepy kind of, I'm not really sure what's going to happen feel to it, and very grimy and gritty, and the characters are all kind of suspect, and but all in this crazy, crazy, fantastic world,
Yeah.
Really, it took me probably like 100 pages to get into this one for some reason.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I'm not a huge fan of the main character that much. And she's obviously written to be an unlikable main character.
Yeah. But that's the problem with unlikable characters is you really, as a writer, you've got to figure out other ways to get the reader to care about what happens to them.
Yes. And the thing I love about China Maleville is just the weirdness, the strangeness of everything. And of course that eventually sucked me in.
Yeah.
So what else am I reading? I am reading, I'm reading Close Your Eyes by Paul Jessup, who we just brought up.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. I have not picked that up yet, but I love his stuff.
So weird. So weird. It's basically like haunted house in space, but also with the Neil Stephenson idea of language being like a virus.
Right.
And it's like melting people's brains. And I don't completely understand everything else that's happening right now because it is just...
He's a dense writer.
Yes, he is. I mean, he's one of these writers that you could study,
Oh, for sure.
Symbolism and repetition and, just all these writing techniques that he uses to kind of give you the feel for the characters, but also to just like layer on stuff in the plot. You know what I mean? Totally. Totally a writer that you can go back and reread. Totally.
Absolutely.
So that's been a weird one too. I'm reading lots of weird stuff right now.
Well, I think that's good. I like weird reading.
Yeah. Totally. So it's been fun and a little bit mind expanding,
Well, I'm glad you had a good time at StokerCon. Now you're making me want to come check it out next year.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't in Pittsburgh, I probably wouldn't have gone.
Mm-hmm.
A good friend of mine, Scott Hallam, he's trying to break into writing. He's had a few short stories published and stuff. But, his love is horror, and it always has been, always. He's not like me. I have to move around. I can't just stay with one thing, But he's like, I took him to his first conference ever, which was last year at Chicago WorldCon.
Nice.
And he's like, okay, next year StokerCon is going to be in Pittsburgh. We have to go. So, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll go. Because otherwise I probably never would have gone to StokerCon.
Yeah.
But it was cool. It was mind expanding. And I went with the idea of I'm not going to interview anyone because usually I go to these things, I interview like 20 people,
Right.
And literally my whole day I'll have a panel and then I'll have 2 interviews and I have to find lunch somehow. And then it's like nighttime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, that's no fun.
Yeah. So this time I was like, I'm just gonna go and sit on the panels. I did do one panel, but otherwise sat on the panels and just hung out and it was cool. It was fun.
That sounds lovely.
Yes, it was very lovely. The only thing I am upset about is the Swifties killed my opportunity to go and see the award ceremony because Taylor Swift was playing that night.
Oh, no.
And the hotel was 50% Swifties and 50% StokerCon.
Oh, God.
So that was a really interesting mix. It was like, okay, if you're wearing black, you're at the StokerCon. If you're wearing,
so awesome.
It was hilarious. And if you're wearing like, I don't know, sequins and a cowboy hat, you're a Swiftie. And there was nobody else.
There you go.
Except for the employees. And I had to come home before the ceremony and I just couldn't get back because like all the Ubers and everything were gone.
Oh, yeah.
And we're like,
I believe it.
Yeah. And they were like quadruple price because everyone jacked their prices through the roof.
Right. Oh, I hate it when they do that.
Yep. And I had no place to park because every parking space was taken up by a Swiftie for like miles.
Oh, God.
So, damn you, Taylor Swift, for ruining my chance to go to the Stoker Award ceremony. Damn you. Otherwise, it was good.
Very inconsiderate.
Very inconsiderate. Consider me next time.
Sure.
Are we ready to sign off?
I think we're ready to sign off.
All right, and that's it for us today. We are keeping hope alive one episode at a time. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey and produced by Ken Schrader. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Sam J. Miller. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.